Hello and welcome again to The Bottom Line, brought to you by TelecomTV and sponsored by IBM. In this episode of our new series, we examine the three all-important strategic imperatives that service providers face today as the speed of change in the global ICT sector continues to accelerate. Successful companies understand the potential for smarter telecom systems, smarter networks, smarter processes, and the smarter use of data in reshaping and future-proofing their businesses, and are overcoming challenges and honing in on untapped global potential by applying smarter telecom systems and solutions to these three imperatives.
If we look at what operators are actually doing, for example, we can see that this kind of strategic multitasking is not something that's new to them. Ever since the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, they've been dealing with a variety of strategic imperatives. So on the one hand, there's a cost control agenda, a balance sheet repair agenda that's a legacy of the bursting of the internet bubble. But at the same time, there are new growth stories available. If we look at this decade, it's very much been about fixed broadband and now mobile broadband. So operators do have a track record that they can build upon in that regard. And even if you look back further, back into the 1990s, ever since incumbents were privatised, their rationale has been to cling on to the customers they already have while signing them up to new services.
Of course, and naturally enough, the tactics that service providers use to satisfy them differ according to their individual circumstances and perceived hierarchies of needs. But the imperatives themselves are concrete things, very real and very pressing. They are: 1. To drive operational efficiencies. 2. To enable and promote new business models and services innovation. And 3. To differentiate and improve the customer experience. Let's begin with operational efficiency. For most service providers, this translates instantly into a requirement to minimize outgoings and maximize values. This is achieved by reducing company operating costs and reining in capital expenditures, as well as by sweating technology and infrastructure assets and increasing employee productivity.
We have seen already many examples of infrastructure sharing regarding backhaul, the radio access network environment, multiple examples in both developed and emerging markets. And that cost is very significant.
We've partnered with Vodafone, a major rival, if you like, in Europe, for doing infrastructure sharing, not just site sharing, but infrastructure sharing.
So if you look at what the transmission costs are for a mobile operator, of which 30% of the OPEX is the technical operations, more than 50% of that is the backhaul for the base stations. That's a serious amount of money, and another 30% is the people as well.
Tactics adopted to drive operational efficiencies differ between mature and growth markets, and driving them in the developed world is actually an order of magnitude more difficult than in emerging economies.
If we look at India, we're talking about 3 million square kilometres and about 300 million subscribers. If you wanted to double that number of subscribers, how many more base stations would you need? About 250,000 base stations. Who's going to pay for those base stations? If you had two operators sharing those base stations, you've got a savings in capex of about 4 billion, and I'm not even talking about some of the operational cost savings. Now, you can repeat that in various different countries, but what it also means is, besides the costs, it's about a shift to service-based competition rather than infrastructure-based competition.
And it's true that on both sides of the equation, improving operational efficiency by reducing costs, as well as improving infrastructure and managing process complexity properly, does enable increased profitability. Now we move on to the second strategic imperative: enabling new business models and driving service innovation. On the one hand, they can do this by leveraging and upgrading existing network infrastructure. For example, LTE will allow the delivery of lucrative 4G multimedia services.
LTE is the next step in what we all now call, quite rightly, mobile broadband. Mobile broadband does what it says on the tin, basically. It gives people access to the internet when they're truly mobile, not just sitting in a cyber cafe somewhere. And LTE is the next evolutional step in that process. We've got a great start at the moment. HSPA is taking off faster than any other technology we've ever known, but we've unleashed a very large demand as well for that technology, and it's important that we keep up, and that's where LTE comes in.
In Europe, we announced that we have already started some LTE trials in 6 countries, including the UK, Spain, but also in Brazil and Argentina. And those countries will give us key lessons for how quickly we should deploy LTE.
On the other hand, the greater and growing availability of broadband means it may well be that there is a greater potential for them in moving sideways into revenue-generating adjacent vertical markets such as healthcare, agriculture, smart metering, the transportation industry, e-government, e-education, law enforcement support, and the finance and insurance industries.
So clearly we've seen in the last 10 years the growth from just over 100 million customers to 4.3 billion or so customers using mobile worldwide. That means in many countries there are more phones than people. And when there are more phones than people, we really need to think about, well, what else could they do with those phones? And health, smart metering, education are very obvious examples. But helping to bring together the different sectors is not an easy thing to do.
The third strategic imperative is to differentiate and improve the customer experience. All service providers claim this is key to their offerings, but some are better at talking the talk than they are at walking the walk. This third imperative, like the other two, requires commitment and investment.
Talking to operators and our discussions with operators, it's all about the customer experience and delighting the customer. But again, this is quite an amorphous concept. It's something that's not easily defined.
So actually visualization of what customers might want is really a tough challenge. But we'll continue to commit to innovation and R&D for the next many years, because it's vital to our future and to our customers' future.
If we look for one moment at the national agenda in lots of markets at the moment, we can see, for example, there's a lot of focus on the digital divide. So boosting social inclusion and increasing fundamentally economic competitiveness by getting everybody onto broadband.
If we're honest, we've been staggered by the demand. And what we've done is convinced consumers that they can get that kind of access, and now they want it everywhere and everybody wants it. So we've unleashed an amazing amount of demand. In order to serve that demand, we've got to run very hard, we've got to upgrade our networks very hard and make sure that we can. Because once you've unleashed that kind of demand, you have to serve it. So the killer driver is demand.
So what's the bottom line to take away from this episode? It is that the 3 strategic imperatives that we've just examined will not be denied and cannot be ignored. Even in difficult economic times, the ICT industry has to continue to invest to meet these imperatives and be able to take full advantage of the upturn the instant it happens. But service providers also have to invest now to save money later by reducing operating costs, operating on common platforms, and including automated processes and self-care regimes. And all of this within the continuously turning virtuous circle of careful asset management, financial management, expense management, and revenue management. That's quite a trick, but if you can get it right, the sky's the limit.
Service providers, it's a very challenging time, has been a challenging time, especially with the economic situation around the world. The key is to get your cost structures in line and be able to deliver new offerings. So for IBM with telecommunications companies, it's how do you re-engineer and take some of that savings and reinvest it to develop new offerings. We have a framework and architecture for the industry called SPEEDY, Service Provider Delivery Environment, and we work together with telco companies and communication service providers as well as partners to adapt and pre-integrate into the overall framework.